Good afternoon. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco. We're so fortunate to have Governor Jerry Brown as our guest on the forum. Edmund G. Jerry Brown Jr. is the son of Governor Pat Brown and the great-grandson of August Schuckman, a German immigrant who settled in California during the California Gold Rush. He is the longest-serving governor in California history, first elected at age 36 and again at 72. He has served as Secretary of State, Chairman of the State Democratic Party, Mayor of Oakland, and California Attorney General. Brown has spent over 5 decades in public service tackling climate change and inequality, among many other issues. Today, we're going to be talking about his long career protecting the earth and serving the people of California. Jerry, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
What a pleasure it is to have you. You know, I have all week people have been asking me to get different endorsements and favors from you, and I've been keeping them away from talking to you. But the questions that people most want to know about, in my experience this last week, are questions about the environment. We're very concerned about climate change, and I wonder if we can talk a little bit about some of the actions we should be taking right now to begin to really advance.
Well, I think first of all, I think it's very important for people to understand climate change, global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, all the things that contribute to that. So understanding the phenomenon, which is something that has only been discussed, I think it was first came to public attention, serious public attention, when James Hansen from NASA back in Maryland testified at the Congress. And that led, by the way, to the Global Summit in Rio in 1992, where the nations of the world agreed to a format, climate framework. And that's been the basis of the climate action all these years. Well, this is going back to 92, and there have been episodes of great skepticism, denial, opposition, and enthusiasm. So I think what you have to know is it's been relatively recent, since the late 80s, and it's global. So what you do is important, what California does is important, but unless everybody is part of the solution, or if not everybody, every nation, every industry, every pattern of human activity, it has to take into account climate change and how to reduce dependence, in fact, use of fossil fuel. So California is doing quite a lot, and I could talk about that. But California is about 1% of the greenhouse gases in the world. The key to any kind of serious climate action by way of reducing greenhouse gases involves China, which is the biggest polluter by far, and the U.S., which historically has been the biggest polluter. We're the 2 big polluters. We're the 2 big oil and coal users. So we're the ones. If China and the U.S. can't work together, can't mutually compete in a good sense to reduce greenhouse gases, then it's done. It's going to get much, much worse. So what you know is that working with China is a good thing. Not to say that China doesn't have flaws, and not to say that the U.S. doesn't have flaws, different ones, but still flaws. Nevertheless, they have to work together. The most greenhouse gases in the environment that last, CO2 lasts several hundred years. And most of what's up there that provides a blanket that holds the heat on the earth, and which makes the temperatures rise instead of escaping. They hit this blanket of CO2 and other methane and other greenhouse gases. Well, America is the #1 contributor. Now, it's only #2 on a yearly basis. So there's a lot of moral, logical reason why these 2 countries need to work together. And President Xi and President Biden are going to meet here next week at the APEC conference. So that's all to the good. What you could do is, I think we want to be what we want the world to be, and so reduce fossil fuels, reduce waste, reduce unnecessary packaging, try to live, I don't want to say a frugal life, that sounds too monastic, but you should live an elegant, efficient life. And by elegant, I mean not a bunch of wasted stuff here. You try to use what you need, have what you need, but not too much. And in the Jesuit seminary, we had a Latin phrase that was constantly pushed in our face, and that was tantum quantum. And what that meant was so much, how much? So much do you need, how much do you use? So there's a relationship, a proportionality between need and use. So I think that's a good for your own personal well-being. And I think it's good because we can't all think about the atmosphere and the environment, but just our own lives. Proportionality, balance, elegance in a very sophisticated sense is the watchword. And that's what the planet is not. When you emit 45 billion tons of greenhouse gas, that's chemicals in the air forming this chemical blanket, that's not elegant. It's not frugal. It's extraordinarily wasteful, and it's not needed because we have the technology and we can organize our lives in a way that that gets off of fossil fuel. Won't happen tomorrow, but we got to start, and everyone doing what you can. And as you do what you can, that spreads. That it becomes normative if people adopt it and continue it. And we need to spread that pattern. Not of yourself. You're not going to change China or India or anything else. But I think it's important that we, in solidarity, do what we should do. Or if we follow Kant's imperative, whatever you do, if everyone else did it, how would it be? That kind of universal imperative. So do your climate elegant frugality in a way that I think is good for you, good for your neighbors, and good for the world.
Yeah, our bishop talks often about this and just talks about this as being the first global challenge. Every human being on the planet is part of this story and needs to be part of the solution. When she...
Yeah, I do want to say, just add a thing there, because we keep talking about compete with China. The rules-based order, which, by the way, I challenge you to find the rules book. The rules-based order. Anyway, China is subject to climate vulnerability just as much as America in different ways. So everyone on the planet, all 8 billion people. So we have a common vulnerability, and that translates to a common interest. And so compete in some things, but we need to cooperate, collaborate in the most basic undertaking of all, and that's living in a way that's compatible with the laws of nature.
You mentioned that Biden and Xi are going to be meeting here in San Francisco. I wonder if you've been in so many kinds of conversations like that. Can you describe, what is it going to be like? What are they going to talk about? What's Biden's agenda as he's having this conversation?
What's it going to be like? It'll be formal.
Yeah.
This is probably more informal than the Biden President Xi conversation. And they'll have their aides, and they will have been programmed, talking points. And they're probably talking about the messaging they want to send, the signaling. So there'll be a lot of preparation. And America's thinking, what can we do on climate, and what can we ask the Chinese to do? And on the other hand, President Xi's thinking the same way. And right now we're in a very hostile relationship, the most hostile it's been in many, many decades, probably since the era of Nixon and Kissinger. It's more hostile. That began a more benign relationship. So we got to get over that, and I think Biden will be looking. Now, will Biden offer enough? Will he be open enough? On the other hand, will Xi be open enough? And I think this is a good question. Most people that you read or hear about are going to say it's mostly China's fault because we're America, we're the indispensable power, we're the city, shining city on the hill. We're good, and they're bad. Now, I do not agree with that frame because from my earliest Roman Catholic teaching, we learned about the wages of original sin that affected everybody. And they are that the soul is inclined to sin, the intellect is darkened, and the will is weak. And I assume that's true in Washington as well as Beijing. So I think we should approach the other side with some humility, with integrity, but we ought to be as open as we can. And from what I know, and I know a fair amount, but I certainly don't know anywhere near all the factors in complexity. It isn't clear to me who may be the block, because we're now having more drilling permits under President Biden than we did under Trump, amazingly enough. Now, part of that's because in order to get his great climate bill, which was quite extraordinary, he had to satisfy the senator from West Virginia. So in part of our process. So we have our oil, China's building their coal plants, and there's a lot to talk about. And I hope they will find, there'll be some agreements. For example, reducing methane. Methane has two salient characteristics. Number one, it's 20 or 30 times more heat trapping than carbon dioxide. But it only lasts 15, 20, 30, or 40 years. So it's out of the environment quicker. CO2, once it comes out of your tailpipe, it's up there 200 or 300 years. So they may agree on reducing methane. And that's a concrete, it doesn't affect the economy quite as much. But when you try to eliminate fossil fuel, then you start slowing your economy, and that's really challenging for any political leader.
Yeah. You know, the cap and trade auction systems, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about them and about just their future in terms of how we address environmental problems.
All right, cap and trade. How many people have not heard of cap and trade? Would you raise your hand? Oh, you've all heard of it. Okay, one person. Well,
Three people.
Schwarzenegger got it going. It was originally a Republican idea to introduce a market mechanism into the reduction of greenhouse gases. And the idea of the market was government artificially puts a price on carbon, and because of that price, people will use less carbon because it's more expensive. So you put a cap, and we say, all right, you can only emit 100 units of carbon. If you go over that, then you got to pay a price. And so that's what we have in California. The problem is, to really get you not to emit carbon, the price has to be pretty high. It's maybe $30 or $40 right now. If you really want to discourage people, it might be 150. If you do it at 150, your gas could double. All hell will break loose. So the problem with the cap and trade, you can't put too high a price and sustain it from a political, civic point of view. But it does have benefit. There's another type of cap and trade. It's called the low carbon fuel standard. What that means is, for companies, they have to come within a certain emission limit. If they don't, they have to pay a fee, and the fee goes to other people, like solar companies. People use biofuels. So what that does is it transfers wealth from oil companies, for example, to companies that make electric cars or people that make biodiesel or something like that. So cap and trade collects money for exceeding the cap, and it goes into government. Low carbon fuel doesn't go to government. It moves the money around from the inefficient to the efficient. One other element about cap and trade, when you put the price on it, what you want to do is get people not using it. And other people, they get the benefits. They do get benefits under cap and trade. So the more efficient people who can eliminate carbon dioxide more efficiently, they do more than their share. So on a net basis, you actually get more. Now, one more angle on cap and trade. A lot of people think that legitimates pollution. So that's bad. And a lot of people don't like the fact that we pay to plant trees and other kind of things. So it gets a little complicated. Like all these things, the more you get into it, the more complex it gets. And that's probably one of the reasons why we're not doing enough. Because easy to talk about in general, but when you had to operate from the government, you get very precise regulations. People argue about it, you modify it. It gets so darn complicated that it's challenging. But
Yeah,
cap
like
and
it can
trade,
ma-
in
yeah.
summary, cap and trade is nice, it's good, but it's not the major factor. Major factor is stopping using oil and having electric or hydrogen cars. It's having efficient houses. It's walking instead of riding. It's changing the whole pattern. It's changing our shipping, our transportation networks. It's the transformation of our way of life in the world today. And it's not one thing, it's many things. And that's why maybe this cap and trade, well, it is why why climate is so hard to deal with. It's not just one thing, stop oil. No, you have to do many, many things, and you need many inventions, many new technologies, and you need changes in human behavior. So you put all that together, and you are challenging the human race to transform themselves.
Yeah, and it's international, so it's not just within a single
No,
municipality.
it's the whole world.
Everywhere.
You're asking what has never been. So it's almost like a conversion.
It is. It's a conversion of of humanity.
Yeah.
So, you've been involved in election reform. I wonder if you had a magic wand, what would you do to improve our democratic system?
Yeah, I'm glad you laughed.
Well, I figured you probably have a lot
See
of...
the humor in it, because the tragedy of it is pretty hard to deal with. Well, what would I do? Some people think proportional voting gives a more balanced set of factors, but it also can create a lot of confusion, like you see in Israel and like you can see in Italy and some of these places with proportionate voting.
So one person, one vote, not having like a senator
Well,
from North
if
Dakota.
you elect people, you could get 10% green,
Oh, yeah.
10% right wing, 20% Christian Democrat,
Right.
8% socialist. So all these voices are there. As far as that rank choice order, I have a hard time figuring that out. Theoretically, it's supposed to be more democratic. I like to know who I'm voting for. So when number 3 or whatever the hell that works,
Yeah.
I think
that's
it's
interesting.
questionable. So I can't tell you. We've had this system. It's mired in money. The money is incredible. You just got to get money, and people who are offering money, in many cases, they want something. So you're biased. And people talk about implicit bias. Well, the political system has an explicit bias for all the moneyed interests, and they come from all sides: labor unions, oil companies, banks, all the rest of it. So, I don't know. I would like to. We could spend the rest of the.
Yeah, I like that though. I mean, it's just a good reminder of just like how do you control money?
And the money's a problem. The media is a problem. Everything's about clicks, making news, being memory clever. But this is part of the human condition. It's a messy business. I wouldn't get overly excited that we have the greatest system in the world. I know we say that, but it's got a lot of flaws. Now we can look at the other ones. They got different kind of flaws. So how you can make it better, like when we're looking now at the Washington and what's going on in Congress, President Trump may win again. Yeah, this is not a topic that you will go home enthusiastic. So I think I'm gonna stop
It won't
here.
inspire us.
I think it's a worthy topic of discussion and reflection, but I would prefer that we devote an entire hour to that. Otherwise, as I go thinking one thing or another in my mind, this is a bottomless pit. So I just give you that little taste of the problem. But do not feel comfortable with the system we have or where it's going.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just like, what has Donald Trump revealed about America, and where is all this going to have a presidential candidate who's doing so well in the polls?
He wants to deny the election.
Yeah.
And he wants to, his interest in building up Taiwan, which could provoke a war with China, and then we could have a war in Ukraine, we could have a war in the Middle East, we could have a war in China. That would not be my advice on where we're going, because we're pretty overextended the way we are. So Trump is not reliable, not a reliable guy. I can say that. I sat in the helicopter with him when he came out for the Paradise.
Oh, right.
So I sat right across from him, and his son-in-law, Gerard, he was sitting over there, and Gavin was on the other part. It was just 6 of us in the helicopter for an hour. So that would take another hour for me to to tell you what I learned, I will say this. Well, this is going to be, no, I don't want to get into the criticism, but Trump is not my cup of tea. This is not what I think America needs, for sure. But just because I always like to take it one step further, Trump is not our only problem. We not just climate, but the conflicts that are going on in the world can easily escalate, and we don't know if they're going to be contained. The nuclear weaponry, 13,000 nuclear warheads, all most of them bigger than what was dropped on Hiroshima, many times bigger, big problem. And the systems that control them, software, are not 100% reliable. And we can have false alerts. The ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, they are supposed to be fired on warning because they're there. If you don't use them, you lose them because they can be hit. The Russians can hit them, maybe even the North Koreans now. But if you fire them before you know a weapon actually is coming, you may have a false alarm. And we've had false alerts. William Perry, who I just saw yesterday down at Palo Alto where he lives, 96 years old, former Secretary of Defense. When he was Secretary of Defense, he got a call at 2 in the morning that the Russians had launched several missiles heading toward America. And he did not call the president. He didn't think, because of the way the state of the world, he didn't think Russia would be doing that. And it turned out to be false. There was another instance in Russia where the captain in charge was told missiles are coming, and he didn't go up. He kept it to himself. It turned out that it was some light from Greenland. It was a mistake, and there are a few others of those. So there's the ever-present danger of a blunder. All the more reason why arms control and dialogue is so crucial. But what we're finding is vituperation, rhetorical enthusiasms of us against you. And yes, there's there's bad repression in China, coal plants, Putin invading Ukraine. But if we escalate to a nuclear war, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands, we're talking about hundreds of millions. And so you have to be able to operate on many levels. And the news operates on news of the day. What's the big story today? Or what's the big story for this week or this month or this season? But our leaders have to think of the big things. And the big things, the ultimate big thing is runaway technology. And that's nuclear, that's fossil fuels leading to climate change, that's not only pandemic, but biothreats. And the threshold for manufacturing dangerous pathogens is getting lower. And with artificial intelligence, it'll speed up even more. So biothreats is big. AI is creating a whole new unpredictable element that will be used to decide, is weapons coming our way? Well, maybe the AI gets it wrong. So that's why people are saying AI really needs to be dealt with, but people aren't quite sure how to do it. And then we're militarizing space. We have our Space Force. Chinese are doing their thing. So we got a lot of, humanity is at a point now where the risks are quite great. And the number one concern has to be minimizing, avoiding those threats. Now, in the middle of all that is, of course, you have inequity and social injustice. I didn't even talk about that. So that's another, a whole nother matter. But there's a lot. And our politics is not that sophisticated that these kind of issues can be talked about, because things have to be reduced to a soundbite. The very simple statements in these debates and the news of the day. So yeah, our system depends on public opinion, but public opinion is eminently manipulatable in many respects.
Yeah, and in many ways, I think that gross income inequality and wealth inequality is destructive to our democracy.
That's destructive too. It not only people suffer, but their suffer is going to engender ever greater resentment and instability in the system. Yeah. It's very hard to have a system with some having so much and many having nothing, and then many on the edge. Yeah. Tens of millions on the edge. So that also then opens the way for demagoguery. People are looking, it's so complicated, what could I do? And, Trump comes along and said, I can solve that one in 24 hours. So because if your anxiety is great enough, you'll have a tendency to want to believe that. I do believe that phenomenon of the extremes is a function of the inequality, the insecurity, the lack of legitimacy in the way our society and our economy is unfolding.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time. I was at a dinner 2 nights ago with someone who's doing artificial intelligence music. So there's applications to it that that's a cultural, artistic application, but there's so many different ways it's changing the playing field.
Just a mind a little incident. When I was a senior in high school, my English teacher for one of our exams asked each student to write their impression of a green leaf. And I always felt that my impression was very deficient. And every time I see a tree, I say, can I feel that one a little more? Yeah. Well, I had ChatGPT.
Right, you asked it.
And I asked your impression of a green leaf, and it was pretty good. Yeah. It was better than mine, by far. So the AI had more impression than Jerry Brown in 1955.
It's okay to check it out for first drafts for sermons too, but man, the robots are not anywhere near to being ready for prime time. So you've had so many important positions in the state of California. You've been governor, mayor, secretary of state, attorney general, the party chair. Is there one of them that you liked best or better than the others? How were all those different roles different, and what did you appreciate about the
Well, first of all, I have to say, in all candor, I liked them all.
Yeah.
Because not having them is not good.
Right, exactly. Then you can't accomplish anything.
What else are you going to do?
Yeah.
So they're all exciting. They're all interesting. They're all in varying degrees important. I liked being mayor of Oakland, as I remembered Secretary of State and governor. Of course, that was very exciting. Running, and I was a young guy in my 30s, but I liked being mayor of Oakland. It was concrete. What I could never get right as governor, we deal with bills, maybe 1,200 bills a year, and policies, housing policies, water policies, crime policies. But when you're mayor, you deal with a condominium project at 14th and Broadway. You deal with crime, sideshows, out in various parts of East Oakland. And you could see improvement. It was after the recession of the 90s. And I became mayor in 1999, and I was able to attract a lot of building. I set as my goal to bring 10,000 people to downtown Oakland, and that happened. At that time, that was unimaginable. Oakland was, not too much was there. A few Vietnamese restaurant, which by the way recently closed, not much was there. So bringing builders, I remember having the guy from Trader Joe's and driving him around. Say, here's the spot, what about over here?
Yeah.
Well, he didn't come, but 2 years later he did. So that concreteness, that it's not crime, it's someone injured or murdered or robbed on this street that you could visit, you could see, you talk to the police. And so it had concreteness, whereas governor, you're talking about an overall law, but you're not watching it. Also, you have to go places. You have to get in a plane, go to Los Angeles, San Diego. But as mayor, in 15 minutes, you can go from the Bay to San Leandro. You can cover Oakland just in minutes. So I like that. I like not having to get on a train. I like being there, and I could walk to work. I lived only a few blocks. So yeah, I like that. Now, having said all that, I don't want to go back and be mayor of Oakland. Certainly not now. But then I got to be governor. That was I started to say fun, but it was. It was very, what was unique is to have been governor and finished in January of 1983, and then come back in January of 2011. So that's 28 years. And I had a lot of experiences, time to reflect on what worked, what didn't work. And so that, going back in the exact same office that I was in before, same place, that was it's like kind of going back in time.
So the years between, I mean, how did they prepare you, and how is it different the second time being governor than it was the first time just being?
Well, the difference between being, I guess I was 42 when I left. And being,
36 when you became governor first, and 72 when you became governor the second
well, 81 when I left.
Yeah.
So, yeah, older.
Yeah.
Older, that's different.
Yeah.
So your life, when you're 80, life's a lot different than when you're 36 or 38. Your whole perspective, your time frame. But also, you do know more. I think I'm more cautious, but more knowledgeable. Also, when I went the first time, I was one of the youngest. So everyone in the legislature was older than me, and they didn't take me that seriously. The next time around, I was the oldest. And I knew more than all of them, so I had a little more respect. So I enjoyed that. The first time I had to work very hard. I didn't get that much respect anyway. Maybe I didn't deserve it. But in any event, the second time there was more, I knew more. Also, the problems were clearer. In 1975, yes, the unemployment rate was 10%, but what the state government had to do was not as clear as in 2011.
Yeah,
2011, California had $27 billion deficit. Well, that became the organizing principle to reduce that deficit, which we did. We eliminated it entirely, built up a rainy day fund. So that was good. Also, between the first term and the next, climate became into focus. So our programs of pollution control, the electricity from renewables had advanced. We're 25% renewable. So there's a lot more, we were further down the path to dealing with renewable energy, building efficiencies, and things like that. So I knew more. I got I could pick a team that was more experienced. Also, I was married. That's a big deal.
Right, that is a big deal.
That's my wife's here in the audience, so I'm going to be careful. There she is. Ann is in the back, in the red.
Right, yeah.
All right, so I had Ann. Ann is not into politics. I'm into politics. But she's into management, and she knows how to manage things. So if you put political with management, you get a coherent office. And that's exactly what we had. And she was a key advisor, not only in recruiting the key people in the governor's office, but in helping. In fact, even some of my veto messages that she actually composed with a little bit of editing on my part. So it was...
Yeah, it makes a big difference to have that person in your life and what kind of team you can set up. And
also, when I was there the first time, I lived in an empty, underfurnished apartment.
Right,
so
I
I would
remember
like
that.
to stay... I didn't want to come home early, so I would work late till 8 or 9, then I'd go over to the local pub or Frank Fat's and stay till 10:30 or 11, then I'd go home. So with a wife, you want to get home earlier. So.
Yeah, I love the way when you talked about just the world looks different when you're 80.
It does.
There is a way in which, when I was a younger person, as somebody who's 56, I appreciate the Psalms from the Old Testament in a way that I just never did at any point in my life. And so my spiritual life is changing and evolving. And I wonder if yours is too, or is it just a fairly constant thing, or
Well, it's not constant.
Yeah.
I can assure you, my attitude or consciousness going to Sacred Heart Novitiate on August 14th, 1956 is profoundly different than sitting here this afternoon. Also, so many experiences. I've had, I spent 6 months in Kamakura, Japan, practicing Zen meditation under a Zen teacher there. 2 Zen teachers. One was a Buddhist lay teacher, Yamada Roshi, and the other was a German Jesuit, Father Emile Lassalle, and he had taken to the practice of Zen as a Jesuit priest. And both those men were extraordinary. And Father Lassalle was extraordinary because he was in Hiroshima the day the bomb dropped, and he was able to walk out. And talking to him about that is quite moving. So also, just from a meditation point of view, the Ignatian meditation, if you look through the spiritual exercise, is about forming images.
Right.
You might conceive in your mind the wedding feast of Cana, and then you think about that and what lessons you might derive. The Zen meditation, and Zen is a more severe practice, you don't have any images. You're just supposed to sit on your cushion and breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Now, it turns out that I could do that for 10 hours, whereas 1 hour of the Jesuit meditation, it was very hard to keep the imagination.
I agree.
Or how it worked. I'm sure you can master it in some way, but the Zen meditation, while can be difficult, it also, it's a different kind of experience. And the Christian perspective would call the prayer, the centering prayer,
Yeah, right.
prayer of simplicity.
Yeah.
And within the English tradition, there's a very famous treatise called The Cloud of Unknowing.
Right, exactly.
So The Cloud of Unknowing, which is a book I've read a couple of times, I very much was impressed with. Cloud of Unknowing, the author says you should focus on one syllable. And it sounds just like a Zen meditation, where you're supposed to focus on one syllable. And that quiets the mind. And as the mind empties, then you're more receptive, and you see more clearly. That's the idea. So I would say that practice, and by the way, Zen practice does not have to have a doctrine. In the place that I went, there were Christians, there were Jewish people, there were Buddhists. So Zen, from many perspectives, is not part of Buddhism. It is in Buddhism. It came out of Buddhism, but the practice of attention, of meditation, or what they call zazen, that I think transcends any denomination.
Yeah, I find I've definitely done the meditation practice like the Ignatian exercises, but I do find like meditating on a passage, the words, and that emptiness is much more helpful to me. You know, I think of the stress that you must have been under at different stages in your life. I think about like vetoing the legislative budgets, for instance. Did you find a kind of strength in your spiritual practices that were at all helpful in moments
Well,
like that?
I can't say. I haven't been too stressed.
Yeah.
I do get stressed. I've had a few stressful experiences. Generally, I give more stress than I receive.
That's great.
So that's helpful. I would like to tell you that my Zen meditation has made me calm, and it hasn't. I'm a bit reactive. I get it.
But just think of how reactive you'd be if you never started practicing.
Well, I'm very enthusiastic, and I do get excited. But I think that's good because life is very exciting.
Yeah.
And it takes enthusiasm to persevere.
Yeah. You know, when I was in college at Berkeley, George Duke Machen Jr. was on my floor. So his dad was the governor. He was living on my floor. And I wonder if you can reflect about what it was like for you being at Berkeley, having your dad be the governor. And, you know, in some ways for George Jr., I wonder how much it it was prevented him from having a more liberated experience of the college, and to what extent it, for you also, opened other kinds of doors. But what was it like having your dad be the governor and being a student?
Well, I don't want to dispel anybody's views, but having your father governor is better than not having your father governor. There's no doubt in my mind.
George never said that.
No, there are plenty of benefits, privileges. No, there's no doubt. It's a good deal.
Yeah.
I got a very good deal. Of course, it was a good deal to have my grandmother, August Schuckman, who read me Bible stories when I was a little boy, and she would tell me about the mountain house where she grew up and how special it was. And I ultimately went and built a house on the very spot, or the very place 200 feet from where the mountain house was. So it was good to have, she was a very curious woman, lived to be 96 when she died in 1974. So that was good because I think she had the openness and the seeking. She had the quality of a seeker. And we would often talk about, she didn't like the Catholic Church, by the way.
Yeah.
So in my fervor, I'd always say, Grandma, you were going to hell if you don't straighten up. So that was,
I can imagine
that was a lower order consciousness that I had.
I can imagine her being kind of like one of your teachers, just in the way that those teachers at Berkeley were too. And
Well, I forgot to tell you, being at Berkeley, I'm Brown, Jeremy Brown. What the hell? Nobody knows my father.
Yeah, right. But if your last name is Duke Machen, it's kind of a different thing.
Duke
and
Machen.
Your first name is George. It's
Yeah, I don't think anybody paid any attention to me at Berkeley.
We have a tradition at Grace Cathedral where we collect questions from the audience. We're collecting a zillion questions. And I have only asked you like 2% of the questions I wanted to. But I want to be a good sport and share the chance to ask questions with everybody else. All right. Dear Governor Brown, I am a senior at University High School here in San Francisco. This semester, I've been researching the role of organized labor in California agriculture with the goal of incorporating my findings into a lesson plan for one of our history courses. To that end, I was wondering how you saw and felt the impact of agricultural organizing in your first versus second terms. Very good question. About the United Farm Workers.
First of all, the United Farm Workers under Cesar Chavez was a very powerful movement. The AFL-CIO had tried to organize in the fields of California. They totally failed. It wasn't Chavez started, but actually there was a Filipino named Larry Itiong. And Larry is the one who called the strike, and Cesar joined it. And that started off the UFW. But this was the time, I think it was after the Bracero program had been shut down by the Democrats in Washington. And so farm labor was in short supply. So that gave the unions some leverage. And then then Chavez, very charismatic, very focused, and attracted incredible talent. $5 a week, room and board. He had lawyers from Yale, from Harvard, incredible. And they just wore down the Teamsters, and they were quite extraordinary. They won hundreds of elections. But the way it evolved, and that's a whole long story. Miriam Powell has a biography of Cesar Chavez, which is pretty good, very good, which will explain all that. But the union, ultimately, it's much weaker than it was then. There's maybe 4,000 or 5,000 members, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's very hard to organize unions, and it's very hard to organize in the fields, and it's very hard to organize with people who, many who are not here legally. They're not, and so where we are now, the farm labor had a few years of success, has enabled the farm workers to continue as an institution, and it's been modified, strengthened in recent years. But I would say that, like much of organized labor outside the public sector, the UFW has a lot of challenges. At the first time, it was the Teamsters who were trying to destroy them. And that took a lot of energy, just fighting the Teamsters, and they were fighting the growers. So it was quite it's an interesting topic, and I would commend you for doing a history plan on that one.
Yeah, me too. I look forward to reading the paper. What were your experiences of Cesar Chavez and the different people who were active in that movement?
Cesar, first of all, I'd say very impressive. I'd use the term charismatic. That word isn't, that's a religious term that's used in the New Testament, so I'm always kind of wary about using it. But he had an aura. I mean, if I were to ask you, who are the people that I've had were charismatic? I mean, I can name on one hand. I met John Kennedy. He had an aura about the other politicians. They just don't. Mother Teresa, and Cesar Chavez. I remember I saw him for the first time. He had his plaid shirt on, and he walked through a home that my father was using in his 1962 campaign in Los Angeles. He just walked in, and all these guys were in suits, and Chavez is a short guy. He stands out. And I don't want to compare him because Mother Teresa is on a whole nother level. But when I saw Mother Teresa in Rome, in the Vatican, where she was setting up a home facility to help the poor, the Pope walks in, and Mother Teresa walks in. All the eyes were on the woman with the blue and white sari, not the Pope. So she exuded more, I mean, something. And Cesar, he had that feeling. So talking to him was interesting. I tried to talk him out of a couple of things, which I failed at. But he had flaws. He had serious flaws. And I would say at this point in my life, I realize everybody's got flaws. It's very rare, and they have all these exposés on people. Well, don't be surprised. There are very few perfect, probably there's no perfect people, and there are many people who do pretty good, but do some bad things as well. So, but Cesar was, to be able to be a farm worker and to build that movement, virtually from nowhere, and become a worldwide figure. That's something. I don't know what that is. Not everybody does that. And very few people do that.
You met Dorothy Day, too. What was she like as a person?
Dorothy Day is another one. I actually went down on a field trip from Stiles Hall to join strawberry pickers in Stockton before Chavez. This was 1960. There was no Cesar Chavez that I knew about then. Anyway, so we stayed there. In fact, we slept on the platform, a deck of a church down there, a country church, wood frame church. Anyway, she came the next day. We sat around, and she sat in a chair, and she talked about us. And I can't remember what she said, but I know it was very inspiring. And I went up to her afterwards, and I said, how can I learn more about what you're telling us? And she said, read Paths in Utopia, which is a book by Martin Buber, written in 1945. Paths in Utopia, about utopian socialist experiments. And so I read, it's not an easy book to read. I've read it twice. And so that's what I got from Mother Teresa.
You know, we have an image of Martin Buber in the stained glass window over there. So he's wearing on your way out, everybody's going to look at Martin Buber. He's wearing a brown suit, and he has a little Star of David in the right next to him.
He was, but she was, she walked around, she would visit the poor people. She started the Catholic Worker Movement. And that, in my mind, the Catholic Worker Movement was a very romantic idea. You're helping the poor, and she went all around the country. So she's another one. These are rare people. They don't make it. She's an original, for sure. And she got along with Cardinal Spellman, interestingly enough, and she protested the bomb shelters. But he always protected her. Which was interesting because he was a very conservative guy. He was pro-Vietnam War. She was totally against all that. Yeah. But he could see what we called, I don't know if we still use the word sanctity, but she had that, for sure.
It's a good word. Okay, here's another question from another guest. Gregory Bateson said the major problems today are a result of the difference between the way we think and how the world works. Oh, Immanuel Kant says that too. What would you suggest as one way we might think differently?
Well, I know Gregory Bateson. I knew him. He died in 1980. I was with him 2 days before he died, and you could hardly hear him. I leaned down, and the last thing I heard him say was, "Are there more angels?" Yeah. And then he said, "It's okay." That's Gregory Bateson. He came from 5 generations of atheists, English atheists. And he did say our thinking is muddled, deeply muddled, and we don't understand how living systems work. Now, what did he say were ways of getting a clearer thinking? He gave a couple examples. Religious experience, nature, watching animals, art. Art works on a different process. Understanding your dreams, trying to see things that don't follow your logical, cost-benefit, materialistic, kind of grabby mind. And if you look at animals, they don't have as much, they don't have neurosis like we do. So watch how animals function. Not to say they don't. I have some very nice dogs, and they're very sweet, but if they get a squirrel, they kill it very quickly. So they're predators. Nevertheless, Bateson did say in one of his essays, he wrote the book Steps to an Ecology of Mind. He has an essay in there where he talks about dreams, religion, art, love, not the grabby, the logic. We run the world is running on management and what works and efficiency. Well, the biological systems, they run on what works, but their efficiency is different than ours.
Yeah. So we're going kind of moving into the speed round because we have a lot of questions.
Go ahead.
So what is your, Governor Brown, what is your position on reformations for African Americans, descendants of enslaved people? Do you support proposals by the California Reparation Task Force?
I've not read it all, and I haven't even read any of it. I just read the stories about it. I think we have to achieve justice in contemporary terms. And the stain of slavery, I don't know, we certainly haven't gotten over it yet. Maybe not get over it for many decades ahead, decades to come. But I would say that if there are issues, like one of the issues they talk about providing compensation for prisons. Now, we have prisons. George McMahon built 12 of them. Prison reform, law reform, but also adequate law and order. I think we should deal with crime and punishment and rehabilitation on its own terms. And if there, and then equalization, whether it's income assistance, income supplements, scholarships, housing assistance. I think we have to deal with the problems. And we have in our society waves of people who are quite disadvantaged. Immigrants that have come that worked in the fields, still work in the fields, many people. You have people who have fallen by the wayside because of addiction, maybe no fault of their own. So I think you have to, as much as possible, look at the totality of California, all 40 million, and what is your hierarchy of good that you want to do. But you got to do it, I think, all human beings. We're all similar. We have different experiences. There are Jewish people who, some are still alive, who were in the Holocaust. They have a disadvantage. They have, wow, what they experienced. So, and you have a lot of people who, well, we have them up, Native American people that were totally deprived for thousands of years. They're here, they're pushed out. So what is the compensation there? So I think justice and creating justice needs to be the framework. Compensation is, that's a difficult thought. We have these things in the tort law where they give you money for pain and suffering. And so what is suffering worth? I've always had some difficulty with that. So how we deal with that. So I would say there's ills. For example, I have a school that I created, the Oakland Military Institute. We have 550 kids. We have a number of African-American kids, majority Latinos, and we have a majority of kids not on grade level. And I've been working in that school for 21 years. I've raised $18 million for it. I'm striving as hard as I can. And so you tell me, how do we get the tutors? How do we get the best teachers? How do we get good administrators? How do we get curricula? How do you get materials? Do you do after school? What kinds of activities? That's the work. And that's everyone in there can benefit. And they have different needs. Some kids, not just a few, big numbers come out of Oakland schools 2, 3, and 4 years behind. They're in the 7th grade. They can't do 7 times 6. They can barely read. And we got to work at that. So that's the problem. How do you teach reading? What about people low motivated? What about families that are under tremendous stress, that are moving all the time, or even homeless, foster care? So there's plenty of problems to deal with the actual problem itself, whatever it is. Is it a house? Is it a disease? Is it an injury? Is it educational gaps? And that's the way I would approach how you deal with all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I just because I've studied so much for today to prepare, I have read things that you've written about addressing problems at the most local level with the people who are most actively involved in the issues. But here's another question. This is about HighSpeed Rail. As governor, you were at times outspoken proponent of HighSpeed Rail. How do you feel about the current state of the California HighSpeed Rail project, and what do you think needs to happen to make the project a success?
Well, I like HighSpeed Rail. I think it's good. It's inevitable. Not inevitable, but it certainly, we can't constantly build more cars and have them on the freeway. So even if you get clean cars, if you go from, almost everybody having a car to everybody having 2 cars, or there's too many driving around, trains are a good thing. China has 20,000 miles of high-speed rail, 20,000 miles. We don't have one, and yet we're supposed to be the superpower. So I do think it's good. It will allow people to live in the Central Valley and work in Silicon Valley. It will reduce, not eliminate, but reduce dependency on the car. And I can tell you, since I've ridden in the high-speed rail in Japan, the bullet train. I've ridden in the train in France and in China. It's very pleasant. It's much better than driving. And so, anyway, I think it's a good thing. Do we have the money? Not enough money. It costs a lot of money. Everything's overrun. The BART project was overrun. The Panama Canal project. And whatever we're building, it's always more expensive. The big dig in Boston, that ended up costing 10 or 11 billion, digging a tunnel under Boston. Actually, it's pretty nice. So it's expensive, but that's the way projects go today with all the different rules. I think it's worth it. I think we can afford it. And it'll take federal government stepping up to the plate as well. And then California has to do its part.
Here's a question. Has California passed its halcyon days? If not, what is it that bodes well for the state? Like, how are we?
I have no idea when our halcyon days were.
It's right now for me.
Remember, the halcyon days were when my father was building freeways, I guess. But,
yeah, right.
But you also had redlined district. You had a lot of issues. So we don't want to get nostalgic about the past or too fearful about the future.
I like that. That's a good answer. That there are no especially good days. These are the days that we have.
Yeah,
and
it's over. It's not over. It's not over till it's over.
Yeah, exactly.
It could be over. It could be over tomorrow. If one of these nuclear bombs they let loose, we're done, and that's a real possibility.
Yeah.
I do want to plug, because this is one of the most serious concerns I have. Our leaders don't seem to be adequately concerned. I brought Bill Perry and Sam Nunn to meet with one of our big leaders. I'm not going to tell you who. And I wanted to have Bill Perry tell them about the danger of nuclear accident and mistake. And this great political leader, after 1 minute, changed the subject to politics. Could not sustain more than a minute of conversation on this serious thought. And I do think the way we go around talking about serious, lesser issues, but we forget about the big issue, the Big Bang. It's over. We have, nuclear bomb. Hiroshima was one thing, one little 15 kiloton. Now we have, it's unconceivable. 200 bombs would create a nuclear winter that would starve billions of people, quite possibly. We don't know for sure. We're like children playing with nitroglycerin and dynamite and matches. It's crazy. So I think that's the big problem. Will our leaders wake up in time to act prudently? And prudence is the virtue that's
That was
missing.
one of my biggest questions for you, was about nuclear, because George Shultz was here, talked about nuclear the whole time. Our former Bishop Bill Swing talking about nuclear all the time. I'm grateful for that message.
And nobody's talking about it.
And no one's talking about it.
You probably have never heard about nuclear.
Yeah. All of the people who are talking the most about it for me are the people who are in your generation.
Right, the thing is over.
Yeah.
Well, it was over kind of the Cold War, because Reagan talked with Gorbachev, and we went down from 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world to about 13,000. But now we're all building up. Russia's building 5 new systems. China's going from 400 ICBMs to 1,000. America just came up. Washington has a new report urging us to match whatever bombs the Chinese build. And if we do that, then the Russians say, oops, you're building your weapons, well, we'll match that. And then as we do it, then the Chinese, and if the Chinese build, then the Indians are going to be afraid of that. So they'll want to build, and if the Indians build, the Pakistanis want to build. Then we're off to the races. And it gets the more dangerous. So the most imperative thing is for the leaders of the world to deal with the biggest problems in hierarchical order. And nuclear is right at the top, and it can be handled. And then you got climate, and you have global starvation, and you have pandemic, and you have AI and space, and there's a few others that I won't bother you with.
We're running out of time so quickly. What advice would you give to somebody who is running for president?
What advice would I give? Well, what advice would I give? It's such a gauntlet that you have to run. The most important lesson I learned is don't say something stupid. Or don't screw up, because the blunder is far more memorable. That's real big news. Your good idea, your well thought out program, it's not news. It's not there. The news is news is man bites dog. We've never seen a man bite a dog. So if you see it, that's news. Well, the mistake is news, not the ordinary good deeds. So I would say try not to put your foot in your mouth, or do something stupid, which you can do. And yeah, we all do things that are stupid. I did a few myself. Then I think you have to create, I think what the vision, John Kennedy spoke at the American University in June of 1963. Before the year he was assassinated. He talked about the testing. Then we had nuclear testing that had radiation in the atmosphere. We had atmospheric testing. And he gave this talk to stop the testing and reaching out to the Russians, Khrushchev. And he said, Khrushchev, the Russians, your grandkids and mine, we're all going to inherit the same planet, and we all breathe the same air. It was very eloquent. It was a one world. It's what I would call planetary realism. He didn't use that term. But it was we're all in it together. I don't hear that language. I hear competition. I hear but I don't hear that sense we're all in it, and we all are. It's hard to believe this big planet, but it can be affected by climate, by weapons, by plague. It can be affected. So I think the president has to speak in those large terms, give engender confidence in America, but don't do it by vilifying other countries and pointing at their evils. I think if you can do that, now it's so easy to just be anti-China, anti-this, anti-that. That's the currency of the realm. The congressmen love that when they have, but that's bad. And the trouble with democracy, it can devolve into demagoguery and ultimately, a mob kind of situation. So I think eloquence, not saying something stupid, not being careful, appealing to people, but encouraging their better, as Lincoln talked, the angels of our better spirit. That's where we got to go. Just read the second inaugural by Abraham Lincoln. That would be my guidance for anybody.
The better angels of our nature. Right? Yeah, that's beautiful. I can't believe we went through time so quickly. But I would love it if you could talk a little bit about just signs of hope that you're seeing, because you have seen a lot of decades on this mortal coil, and I wonder what you see that is giving you hope for the future.
Well, hope. That's a good question. Albert Camus didn't like, if you read the myth of Sisyphus, he has some commentary on hope that you might find interesting.
That's right. That's good.
But you got to have faith, hope, and charity, all three. By the way, in the Buddhist, we talked about, they would say, what you need is great faith, great commitment, and great doubt.
Yeah.
The doubt was the goad to push you forward. But the hope, I say, well, just recently, I'm here at I live in Colusa, place where my great-grandfather settled, and my grandmother grew up until she was 18 and moved to San Francisco and met a guy named Edmund Brown, my grandfather. But just being there last week, we picked our olives, our olive harvest. We collected over a ton of olives. We already had them pressed into olive oil, which we make. Just that experience of taking the fruit of the vine and being with, we had about 60 other people, all volunteering and sharing it together. There's a sense there that it certainly feels good. Now, and I think being on the land, seeing the moon come up, the moon wax and wane, the stars come out at night, just seeing nature and being aware of what went before and it gives you a sense that something's coming after. Looking at the news, I don't have a television there, so I don't watch any television news, zero. So that gives me hope. But I think I wouldn't look to read about politics if you want to deepen your hope. I would pick some spiritual treatises that I think you'll find a more fruitful avenue than today's stuff, because it's just one story after another, Anyway,
well, it's so good to be just.
Although don't misunderstand me. I like politics. I spent 50 years at it. I ran for every office I could, so I'm bit schizoid at
this is one of the questions I didn't ask, but is there something that people who have been that close to politics know about human nature that's different than, people in other fields? Like is there something you learn from all that politicking?
What did I learn? I learned, you learned about the best qualities of people.
Yeah.
Politics is grasping, grabbing, manipulating. You're trying to get ahead. You're trying to win. You don't want to lose. So it's a very competitive environment, and it all depends on how you look. It's almost like the government is dependent on the news,
right.
And government functions to create news. In fact, when I sometimes characterize politicians as unpaid content providers. They're providing content for the media. So there's another thing that I got in my Zen experience in Japan, where you had certain vows that you said, and one of them was, illusions are endless. I vow to cut them down.
Right.
So that's a good lesson for politics, because it's full of illusions. In fact, it's the illusion business, like the movies, I guess. And politics is kind of a movie. Warren Beatty told me that he was at the White House when Reagan was president, showing the movie Reds. And at the intermission, Ronald Reagan, the president, came back to him and said, "Warren, I can't imagine how anyone could run for president if they hadn't first been in the movies."
Wow.
So that's from the master himself is telling you so movies, politics. Was this about hope? This is
the way we keep getting back. It's like you're the one who was elected after our two actors.
Oh, what did we learn? What did I learn?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I learned a lot in the Sacred Art Novitiate. This was the pre-Vatican II Catholic Church. Latin, silence, abnegation, mortification, the whole 9 yards. This was, you don't see this so much anymore. But Ignatius, in his in the spiritual exercise, in the first principle and foundation, talks about indifference. And indifference, he says, whether you have a long life or a short life, riches or poor, honor or dishonor, wealth or poverty, you should be indifferent. The only thing, you should be open, you should be not attached, to be available to do the will of God. Now that's a pretty severe doctrine. I don't know who can follow that. But having that as an idea, in an attempted practice, certainly I tried that as a Jesuit, then going into politics where everything is the opposite. The contrast between those two things is very enlightening. It's a tension, it's a contrast that can open your mind and keep you wondering and noticing. So I would say I certainly have a darker view of human nature than I did when I entered the novitiate in 1956. The world looks, and people, I must say, people are very flawed. Very flawed. And history looks pretty bad. On the other hand, there's a lot of good stuff. We got a very good harvest of olives this year. People were generous. So it's this, in fact, when I went down to see Bill Perry, I asked him this question because he's 96. I said, "Bill, given where the state of the world is, what do you think about? What are you doing? What is it?" Well, he didn't give me that good an answer. So the question is, looking at the world, not covering your eyes, not cheating, not pretending it's prettier than it is, but also seeing the beauty and having gratitude for what is. That's the exercise. I can't say why, or I can't give you an argument, but I know gratitude is better than bitterness, and I know enthusiasm is better than being sullen or despaired or any other emotion. So I can't tell you why, but I am really enthusiastic. I love each day when I get up, and when I walk my dogs at night and I look up at the stars, I think my grandmother Ida, that she was there as a little girl. And what did she think? Did she feel like I feel? Did she have something else? So I feel that's a wonderful way to be, and I don't know how long we're going to have this world, but on the other hand, we know our lives are coming to an end. So our little end is around the corner, depending upon how old you are, but it's coming. Whether the world's going to come with us, we don't know. Hopefully, things will turn out better than I think they will.
Well, you know, I'm so very grateful to you, Jerry, that you chose to exercise your ministry in the public sphere rather than the ecclesiastical sphere.
Right.
And I've always appreciated just your orientation towards the future and your passion about the future. So thank you so much for being on the job out there, and we're so grateful for your
Thank you.
being here today.
Thank you for showing up. All right.
So next week on the forum at 9:30 in the morning, we'll have Raven Chacon on. He's a Navajo artist. His music is going to be performed this next week. You can come learn more about him next week.